But, but she wants to go.
Oh, to help out
So now,
with the move
Smooth.
that we
And
talked
then-
the plan, which you all don't know about yet, is that we're going to drop the kids off with you guys. She's going to go to Heidi's. And I'm going to go with Jared downriver.
So I'm trying to go help Austin and then want to visit my brother-in-law
Yeah, he's good.
that lives further in Amazon. And he's building his house at the end of February. Everything out of wood there. So I mentioned Josiah, and he's like, oh, that's something I'll be interested in helping out build something.
Just so you won't turn that on.
And
You're going to chime in. You and Laura are not going to sit out on this one. It'd be impossible.
Well, you look like you're sick.
so I know if I convince Kent to go,
That's right.
Cody and Laura go. Well, Laura's already in.
That's right. That would be neat. That would be
Be a
neat.
great trip.
It's a lot better when you go with more people and then just a few, and have a few people and making an adventure.
Instead of dying by yourself.
Still a lot of work.
All of you that. Yeah.
I got to Brazil before she did. She what? Tell her, how do we get her? Get her to go to Heidi's.
All right, we ready to start?
Yep.
You on? You recording?
Yeah.
Okay.
For how long? That's 2.5 minutes. Hey, just try to start it as natural as possible. Once we hit play, you got to kind of freeze up.
So anyway, this can kind of be fun, but I literally saw this yesterday, but wasn't able to read it till this morning. And I got climbed into bed about 4:30 this morning. And then when I woke up, I went back to this and it was like something I read. And I thought, this would be good to share. So this isn't normal, but I'm going to read it. And if you guys decide you want to edit it out, that's fine. But I thought it kind of captured some views that would be interesting. So the title of it is Go Get Her.
Emphasis on Cody and Jared.
And the subtitle is
They targeted here, Charlie.
the subtitle is To Men Delaying Marriage. So that gives you an idea what the topic's about. And we've had so many of these topics around our kitchen table, so that a lot of this is going to be review. But I'm probably got a cold or something. So anyway, on March 27th, 1525, part of the reason why I thought this kind of tied in, and it would have been great if Enzo could have been here tonight because he mentions Martin Luther last week. Mm-hmm. Wolfgang Reisenbosch served as a preceptor in the monastery of St. Anthony. This meant Mr. Reisenbosch had vowed to live a single celibate life. That is, until the Reformation provided him a new perspective, a different justification, parentheses, to be married, in parentheses. What should he do? Write to the fiery bachelor, Martin Luther, of course. Luther wrote back, "It is said that it takes a bold man to venture to take a wife. What you need above all else, then, is to be encouraged, admonished, urged, incited, and made bold. Why should you delay, my dear and reverend sir, and continue to weigh the matter in your mind? It must, should, and will happen in any case. Stop thinking about it and go right to it merrily. Your body demands it, God wills it, and drives you to it." That was Luther, Letters of Spiritual Counsel. 1 month later, on April 26th, Reisenbosch married Anna Herzog, daughter of a poor tailor's widow. Less than 2 months after that, on June 13th, Martin Luther took his own advice and married Katharina von Bora. The advice profited both Reisenbosch and Luther himself, and it might just profit indecisive bachelors today. I pray it might be the little jolt to get some of you should-be marrieds off the fence for good. Get merrily to it. Single men, pews filled with godly women, exiting their 20s, passing through their 30s, and entering their 40s, unmarried. More than a few are gems, Abigails and Ruths and Priscillas and Marys. They would love to manage a household, have as many children as the Lord allows, join a man of God on his mission, but alas, they cannot pursue themselves. Some would be married, but for the immaturity, fear, or selfishness of some of the men. Brothers, I am not interested in chopping you down. The world has taken a twisted joy in that for some time now. But let's be honest. What are some of you doing? Stalling, delaying, trifling, prolonging, joysticking, late-nighting, fast-fooding, boying, perpetual groomsmen, never the groom. Ships in the dock may be overthinking, may be lazy, may be sinful. The excuses are many, only some of them valid. For some, adulthood seems like an undesirable destination, so you settle. Sit yourself on the bench, keep yourself in the shallow end, bowl with the bumpers up. I want better for you. Luther's advice is to be bold. Stop just thinking about it. Know God's will for you and get merrily to it. Be bold. It is said that it takes a bold man to venture to take a wife. What you need above all else, then, is to be encouraged, admonished, urged, incited, and made bold. I had spent mere hours in person with my, parentheses, now wife, at a conference before I spent the little money I had on a ticket to a nation I couldn't point to on a map. I sat in a tiny seat for a 13-hour plane ride to the Middle East to meet her on the mission field with her people. Bro, you're about to fly across the world to meet a girl you just met to be interrogated by her and her whole community? A friend was stunned by the story. This was not like me. Until it was. What gave me confidence? She. I knew her well enough to know that if I were to marry, it would be to a woman like her. This Latina New Englander blew gospel fire. She was on mission. I saw women she discipled glowing in her presence. Any man who dares pursue a woman like that better be about the Lord and his business. I wasn't sure if I was that man, but I was willing to sit on a plane to find out. Community. My guys couldn't agree on much, but miraculously on this, they all agreed. I should get to know this woman. Initially, I tried to squirm out of it. The whole thing was impractical, a waste of time. But they all agreed with a strange confidence that I should let the Lord close the door. Trust God's word. I didn't have to wonder. God told me in his word that a wife who fears him is a crown, a helper, a gift, a lily, a glory, a woman worthy of praise. I didn't need to squint at the stars to discern the Almighty's hand. He taught me what to look for. If he had such a wife for me, I would be the elect of the elect. Men, it takes a boldness in man to venture to take a wife. You will need a good woman to pursue, good men surrounding you, and God's scriptures to embolden, admonish, incite, and steel your nerve to leave father and mother and be joined to a wife. God wills it, body wants it. Marriage is God's clear next destination for most single men to travel toward. Paul makes marriage and fatherhood such a given for men that he assumes most elders, parentheses, those prime examples of godly masculinity in the church, will have both. True, a few will have the gift of 1 Corinthians 7, be what Jesus calls eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom, Matthew 19:12, but this is comparatively rare. Thus, Luther writes to Reisenbosch, defining marriage as the default. Now, chastity is not in our power as little as are God's other wonders and graces. But we are all made for marriage, and as our bodies show, and as the scriptures state in Genesis 2, it is not good that a man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. Nature teaches this lesson well enough. Our male bodies desire marriage. Luther knew what it was to be clothed in hot youth, as Augustine calls it. Therefore, Luther continues, whoever will live alone undertakes an impossible task and takes it upon himself to run counter to God's word and the nature that God has given and preserves in him. The outcome is in keeping with the attempt. Such persons revel in whoredom and all sorts of uncleanness of the flesh until they are drowned in their own vices and driven to despair. Countless men, unserious about marriage, drown in pornography and are driven to despair as a result. Yet these same men fail to make out the vital connection between purity and proposals. Now, marriage is not the one wooden stake to stab to the heart of vampire lust, but marriage is undoubtedly a holy weapon for those burning with passion. 1 Corinthians 7:9. Even those who have victory connect the dots left-handed. I've counseled. You have cut off avenues to websites. Good. You have accountability and are renewing your mind in God's Word. Wonderful. Fasting. Beautiful. Killing the dragon to see God. Praise His name. But let me also ask, what steps have you taken toward marriage? 9 times out of 10, those serious about fighting lust but lax about pursuing marriage are not as serious about their lust as they need to be. I am perplexed by so many who envision winning the war against their desires with an endless fast. They sit and stare at the fruit on the tree of which God has said, in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die, and tell themselves, no, no, no. Good. Yet they are born to eat fruit. Their incessant desire shouts that they do not have the gift of celibacy, and if they stand a few glorious risks away from that blessed covenant that changes no, no, no to yes, yes, yes. Luther again. Let us not try to fly higher and be better than Abraham, David, Isaiah, and Peter, and all the patriarchs, prophets, and apostles, as well as many holy martyrs and bishops, all of whom knew that they were created by God as men, were not ashamed to be and be thought men, conducted themselves accordingly, and did not remain alone. Whoever is ashamed of marriage is also ashamed of being a man or being thought a man, or else he thinks that he can make himself better than God made him. Men, don't try to become better than God made you. The war is hard enough. Don't fight battles one-handed. Yes to porn free. No to wife free. Get the girl. Brothers, in the matter of pursuing a wife, some of you are always learning and never able to arrive to a knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy 3:7. You've heard exhortations like this before, but nothing has changed. Not anymore. Take the next step. For some, that means getting even more serious about holiness to get your lust slain. For others, that means getting a job. For others, that means praying and fasting for a wife. For others, it means stop just thinking about it and actually go talk to the girl at church. For still others, it means finally asking the girl from church's dad for his blessing to marry his daughter. Brothers, awake to the wild glory of marriage. Awake to the glory of a wife. Stop just thinking about it and go to it right merrily. The end. Let's close in prayer. We're done.
No.
So
good.
obviously,
That's what I'm talking about.
so think about who's going to be listening to this potentially. You know,
Oh, that was brutal.
okay, now think about the young ladies out there that might be hearing this and think, yes, 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 about time somebody told these guys what they need to hear. And again, it all comes back to what I overheard you guys talking about a little bit earlier, and I didn't hear all the message today. I heard just the last end of it, but about self-control and all kinds of things. And then we have our perspectives about what we've talked about before. You get married. The Lord says a man's interests are divided. He said, I wish to spare you. If you don't need to get married, don't, because you're going to have trouble in this life. That's the reality of it. But on the other hand, there's nothing to compare to marriage through all the ups and downs and all the struggles. And I would attest to that. But I would like, I already see I've talked too much already. I'd like to get you guys' input on it and feedback, because it could go in so many different directions. It's incredible. So I don't even know how this will spin off in you guys' minds, but
Since there wasn't a video being shot, you should have seen the facial expressions and the exchanges going on while Dad was reading that.
I didn't dare raise my eyes. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to look. Guilt
I
is
can
what I'm
tell.
assuming. Guilt.
That's probably.
Yeah, we should.
Shame.
There's a lot that can be talked about.
The one time we didn't record it, we should have.
So, okay. So, Cindy and I have been married for 38 years.
Congrats.
Josiah and Jill, how long have you guys been married?
15? 16. I'm gonna get in trouble.
This is the Gong Show.
15 or 16. That's what we're going with.
We got married at 18, right?
How old are you now? 35.
35.
You married
Do the
at
math.
18. Well, 18.
17.
3/4.
17 years.
Very nice.
17.
It's 17 in August, so 16.
So 16.
Yeah.
16 years.
16, yeah.
Kent and Laura, how long?
9
And a half-ish.
and a half. Yeah.
Cody?
None.
Jared?
See, you guys could be.
No point.
No bueno.
No bueno.
Yeah. So there's a lot in there. Kent, how about you take it? What do you think?
It wasn't written for me. I'm already married.
Well, but you have input though, from a, you're there in a married perspective.
Pretty much you're on the avenue that you should be married if you have the urge to, right?
I heard I'm the boldest one in the room.
That's right.
I didn't mess around. I got married right away.
Yeah.
18, get married.
I took a little more traditional route. Went 21, so I finished school first. I mean, a little bit that I was doing.
But in this culture, that's still
Young.
That's still wicked early, yeah, compared to others, most. Laura's only 20.
Looking back, put you on the spot. Looking back on Laura, would you do it again? At 20?
Would I get married again at 20 specifically?
Yeah.
What's that? I think like I've definitely struggled with the aspect of like, I think you've faced a lot of people questioning the decision, right? So I think that's always
Cindy.
Oh.
no, I mean like just outside
She's not
people.
here to defend herself.
Just outside people, just
like
even
peers.
yeah, like questioning like, well, why are you getting married? Like, is he in the military? Are you pregnant? Like, all these things like people couldn't fathom why one would get married at an age. I mean, I don't know. I am a pretty big advocate for you can't change the past, so I try not to like think in that way anyway.
Yes.
But I mean, I think there's an aspect for me too that has always had a question like, I mean, you were young, you did start early, and I mean, there are obviously growing pains, but I wouldn't say I wouldn't do it again, but I wouldn't say I wouldn't not maybe wait either, I guess. I don't know. Like, I think I could see it going either way because I think both avenues probably present different challenges, but I mean, it just is the aspect of essentially like you kind of have to grow up together in that way too. Like, we're almost 10 years in and we're very different people now than we were 10 years ago. And I think it can be a tough path to grow up together through marriage in that way, which is also rewarding in the same way. But I think sometimes you're figuring out things out about you in that process, which is sometimes hard when you have, there's another person that you have to think about too. So it changes your thinking. So you can't take in today's culture too, it's like finding yourself in a lot of ways, but you're finding yourself in your marriage with another person, which is a little bit different too. So, I would say like, yeah, of course, like I'm good with where we're at, but it definitely is something that you think, I think there's a lot of culturally, like, did I miss out on things? Like, like, I haven't dated anyone else other than Kent, right? Is that just weird to kind of have only had one person? Like there's always, I think, a little bit of doubt, to be, frank, creeps in occasionally when you're thinking about those things. And so, yeah, of course, I'm happy with life. Like, I'm glad with the decisions I made, but there have been moments where it's been questions of like, could I have explored a little bit more, lived a little bit more, done things differently, feeling like, yeah, when you look back, you're like, wow, I really was young and I was immature and I was a totally different person. But yeah, it definitely is.
Not just like in like the have fun in college sense, but there's aspects of that you and I both did miss out on, like the friendships you could make had we gone to four-year university seem to last with people throughout the rest of their life. Sometimes we didn't have that because we didn't go to four-year university. We were married at 20 and 21, so you do kind of look back and say, did I miss out on other relationships, not just dating wise, but friendships wise that you could have built? And I would say we potentially did lose some friends because we accelerated our life story and others didn't. So, and as they are doing their own path, we accelerated into a different path. and then you just lose friends in that process too. So there's like looking back, like, okay, what could have been different had we waited 4 more years, or whatever it might have been.
But here's the main thing with that: you guys worked through it too, and didn't just say call it quits either. Like a lot of generations.
Oh no, I wouldn't say. I look. I now I'm 30. I wouldn't even want some of those things. But when you're 26, and then you don't really have close friends, the ones that you did have in high school and right after in college, like, what if we just waited? We could have kept them and then got married 4 years later. But I don't really desire that looking back. So, but yeah, but the what if is always there.
I think like on that level too, it's like the what if portion is right. Is like it's always kind of like you're also often. I think people often say like you often want what you don't have, right? Like so it's just easy to be caught up in the, well, I didn't get to have that same experience or go to that. Because yeah, I mean we went to community college, we stayed local partially for our relationship and that dynamic, and we wanted to be financially responsible because we kind of knew a track we were on and kind of making decisions towards that. So we kind of encapsulate all those decisions in like the marriage process, even though we weren't married until after college. The track you were on was kind of related to that, right? And so like, but I think it's just interesting because I'm sure, you guys can comment too. It's like when you look at it, it's like the people who aren't married often are looking at it like, I want to be married. And then the people who are married are looking at it like, oh, what it must be like to be single and not have to consider someone else. So like, I think it's always interesting because, it's very easy to get caught up in that thinking. But
you almost got to pick your what ifs, your future what ifs. And I think we picked the correct pathway of, doubts, quote unquote. Because if you look at us now, because we accelerated our relationship and marriage aspect of it, we then bought a house at 24, 23. We were 23 when we bought the house. So we were in a house at 2017 before the housing market exploded in 2020 and beyond, where it would be very, very difficult same situation for us to buy a house had we waited until we were 26 to get married. But then we wouldn't even be in the house buying process. And if we had, we'd be so far behind. So like we've accelerated so many of the other adult things that normal people do, like buy a house and all that kind of stuff. And we benefited from that financially. Our net worth has, exponentially compounded because we got married young and 2 incomes. And for whatever reason, God's plan and pathway of going through life together as a married couple seems to work out in more beneficial ways than not.
And so often people look at the what ifs and as, I guess, negatively, or that all the other alternatives are positive that they were missing out on. But you could also look at it, what if I waited and we waited 6 years, we kept all our friends, but then your sexual relationship did not go well, was not pure, or you did go with somebody else, or you got a different job or a different college. It doesn't mean all those avenues that you think you're missing out on are positive. Those could be negative what ifs. So it's not all about, what did I miss? But also, what did I possibly avoid? Downfalls as well.
Yeah. From my standpoint, let Cindy speak for herself, but I remember telling her many times I would have married her sooner if I could have, and we were married at 20. But I would echo very similar, I think, to what Josiah and Ken both have said, that it just so benefited us but as I look back on it, I am amazed at today's young people, I'll call them, which could be several generations, but that they seem to be getting married so much later to me, which just, for me, is difficult to fathom.
Well, if you take God out of it, there is not really much of a benefit to marriage.
Yeah.
There really isn't. Because if one of the two in the couple makes a ton of money or makes much more than the other one, there's no benefit to getting married. Because if you just divorce, then you lose a lot of what you produced, not as a couple produced. So like, why would you want to get married? Why would you put all these things at risk if God is not in the picture? It logically makes sense to not get married.
Yeah. Adding on to that divorce part, I think a lot of it just seeing around the society, because of how many divorces happen, I think the younger generation are kind of standing back to marriage in a sense, afraid of it happening to them, just like their parents or whoever they know,
Yeah.
in a sense. But
Or so like so and so, like, oh, parent lost the house because in the divorce, or they grew up with a single family household and they don't want to do that, so they don't want to repeat history, so they don't get married at all. Which, yeah, that's seems to be the logical way to go if God is not in the picture.
I mean, I was not saved till 31, so I lived my life of like, what's the point of marriage? Because like there was no awe to it, and like, or lore to it, I should say. And it's like you can have the experience of a relationship for a short period of time. Why jump fully on board in it and get a headache? Because previous relationships I had were not great, most of them, and it's like, why deal with a person long term when you can deal with a person short term and still get kind of the benefit of almost a relationship but not having a relationship? And like, yeah, it stinks now, 34, like not married and whatever, but it also, looking back on it, I'm glad I didn't get married when I didn't have the Lord in my life, because I'd probably be divorced and down somewhere else deeper than where I am now. So
if you think of the logical progression of going down that path, let's say someone doesn't know the Lord, and there's no need to make the commitment because there's no sexual morality anyway. And so there's no incentive there. And then you don't want the divorce, like you said. You don't want those negative aspects. Maybe you came from a broken home. But then as you age, so now jump forward 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years down the road, where does that path take you? And where do you end up? There's one word that comes to my mind. What words come up to you with you guys? I don't know, but my wife, Cindy, right now, she's at a elderly care facility right now, and there are people there.
Loneliness.
yeah.
There's this yearning inside of us. We want someone to be intimate with, to be close with, not just physically, but with life. We want to share life. It seems to be a God-given thing, whether you know the Lord or whether you don't.
But unbelievers want that too.
That's right.
It seems like they don't exactly know why.
Yeah.
And they weigh the benefit of being lonely and over with the risks of being married.
talking in a Christian standpoint, I think a lot of the younger generations too have a high expectations that might be false.
Unrealistic. maybe?
Unrealistically, yeah.
I agree.
That, and maybe even standards, which some people can argue the fact that you can't have too high of a standard. But on the expectation side, I feel like a lot of Christians aren't, I don't know, they're concrete with their expectations, which should be.
Rumor has that's you, Jared.
Going off that too, it's like
maybe God is using this to work through me, but just in the general Christian aspect, I feel like there's a lot of that.
I also think there's some downfall to, not to the Christian aspect of marriage, but I don't think it's explained fully to the best knowledge to younger people either, because a lot of the time it's like, this is the best thing, got to do it, should do it, this is what you should be doing. So then when you get in that, it's not what you expected of how you were taught, so there's a lot of battling with that as well.
Yeah, and I think I did a bad job with that, trying to teach my own sons, the path and all that. But then the reality of what that fleshes out and what it actually looks like when you have two sinners that are together. Yes, there's just a lot of potential and wonderful things that you jointly are a part of and all of that, but you're also two totally different people. And for me personally, I see every marriage as unique. It's complex. There's no other marriage like yours. None. Obviously, a lot of similarities. You can boil a lot of things down, but the reality of it is, no one knows what it's like to be married to you or to your wife except you two. And so the unique things that you're facing and all of that sometimes can be very, very difficult. So one time I think for a full, I'm going to say this because I can remember hearing it years ago, but for being a full red-blooded male and, desiring to have not only a relationship with my wife, that's a godly relationship in all areas, and part of that is the physical side. And I remember one time coming home and I was listening to a radio broadcast that just really touched on points that really impacted me. And I remember driving by and I went down to the cul-de-sac and I just sat in my vehicle at the time. And I remember I just cried and cried. I just was really struggling. We had young kids. Life was pulling us in different directions. We both had full days. We were very involved in church. And at periods of time, we were out every single night of the week. And trying to fit in that intimate time just seemed to be nearly impossible. And yet, for at least speaking from my perspective, I think I speak for a lot of males, that was very, very difficult. And I remember coming and knowing that I needed to talk to Cindy personally. I needed to communicate. And I needed to accept that she may not understand, also understand all that she's going through, all the difficulties, and how difficult it was for her to maintain her sanity during the day in this, very, very busy household and all of her responsibilities. And then I come into the mix and add to that. And yet we were able to share. And I can say that I really went away with the sense that she didn't understand fully and couldn't comprehend what I was necessarily going through and feeling at that particular time, just like I couldn't her either. But at least we communicated and worked through it. And I do feel like it is something that we work on as married couples all of our lives. It doesn't change. And so we've mentioned this before. There's a lot, I think, like what you were saying, Jared, about, or maybe Cody, but there's a lot of things in the scriptures that aren't really explained or told, not from the scriptures. Young people today aren't told, okay, you should take this path, but what are the reasons why and what are the ramifications? And so for me, going through the scriptures and looking for those passages that might help, there was a lot about, what about, lust and sexual purity and all that. And you just we're bombarded in this society with all those types of things. And that's when we've talked about, not necessarily saying what is sexual immorality and we need to avoid that. No. We've got to stop this, stop that, avoid this, avoid that. But when we put something off, we have to put something on. And what does God say to put on in its place? And so the issue became not sexual immorality, but what actually is the biblical, godly, God-given definition of sexual morality? If we stopped to actually maybe privately between us and the Lord and write that down, or maybe as a couple, write that down so we have a clear understanding in our minds of what that is, I think that can be really revolutionary. It was to me. And I remember telling our pastor one time that if I was ever going to write a book, I think it would be on that, because it seems to be such a struggle for a lot of couples. And you hear finances and then the sexual relationship and marriage are two real big things. And I know there's probably more, and so that was huge for me. When we went to our initial marriage counseling, the pastor who married us said, "Do you have any expectations entering into marriage?" And I said, No, not that I can think of. And Cindy said, "Yes, you do." And she already was clarifying, and she said, "Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that?" And all of a sudden it was like, she got me thinking, oh, that's right. I guess you're right. I guess I am wrong. I do have expectations sort of here. And so we were able to talk through some of that. And, but anyway, just want to share that without getting into all the aspects of it. But.
Yeah, Lord, I had the same thing. Who's going to cook? Can't. Who's going to clean? Can't. I enjoy those things.
But it also says in scripture, just like Jared, like, if you have the gift of being single, don't go and pursue it because it's better to live that way.
Hey?
But
maybe that way.
so don't feel awkward like Jared being single out of everybody.
No, singleness is a no bueno.
No.
And for me, it's a no
If you have the gift of not being single, do not try to pursue it either. I need to man up at some point and ask
That
somebody out.
is also a cultural thing that I'm seeing, which is part of like that thing you read at the beginning. How it's like getting delayed and delayed and delayed.
American
while
dream.
Pursuing marriage and stuff. And the expectations being put on
money aspect.
anybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
Male, female, both sides of no, before you're not ready until you have this amount of money. you have
Graduate,
a house,
graduate first,
college,
get a job first,
Yep.
live on your own for a little bit,
Exactly.
date around for a little bit.
and it's kind of the norm. Like that is expected. And if you break that or you go early, it's like everyone thinks you're crazy or immature or you're not, ready. And I don't remember where I was listening to it, but someone was speaking about that. And they said, when do you, I think it was more on having kids, more so than marriage, but it could apply. When are you ready to have kids? And it's like, well, when I have this much, or when I can afford this, or when I can get to make the numbers in my earning, and they were talking about affording kids more than when to choose and want to have them. And it was like, never. It's like, you're never going to make those numbers work. But guess what? When you have that first kid, you make it happen. Somehow it works. And I found that to be true in my life, both with, early years of marriages and then having kids. It was like, if I tried even my best to make the numbers work, do the budget, figure it out, have an explanation and a plan for everything, I would never have made it work. I would never have made a move. I would have never been able to have kids. But guess what? It's all worked out. God had a plan. It does take hard work. You don't always know how it's going to work out, or you would never have seen the way it did work out coming. And I now have, whatever I said, 16 years of marriage and 4 kids. And on paper, I have no idea how it works, but you do what you're supposed to do, and it happens. So in a way, too, he was saying it makes you grow up.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you could talk about marriage, you get married, you're early, you grow up together. You realize how immature you are, how much you have to work on. It forces you to deal with stuff that when you're single and you can just ignore it, or, oh, it's just me. Well, now you got 2 of you.
You kind of have to be
Figure it
hyper
out.
focused too to like
Wow.
remove yourself, and because you have another person, you have to realize
And then
their
kids do
needs
it
and everything.
again.
Yeah.
If the kids at it, so now you need to grow up with a marriage, and then you have kids out, you're realizing I have even all this more to grow up.
Well, even your marriage,
Step up.
you weren't even there financially. What do you make? $10 an hour at Southwest when you first got married? It's like,
Oh yeah.
you weren't even ready for that financially if you're going by the books. And it again worked out. A couple of years later, you're in a house. Like, and then a couple of years later, you have kids. Like,
A lot of
it
sacrifice.
works out.
But I think the assumption underneath both of
Sacrifices, yeah.
what you guys are saying is you guys both really worked at working with biblical principles, financially
Yes,
speaking.
yes.
So that made a huge difference. So you were working at Southwest, but you were building your own house, living in a little camper for 2 years
To afford it.
to be able to afford it. You made it happen. You didn't go beyond your means.
Just to get laid.
So as I sit here, I know I showed you guys this yesterday, or a couple days ago, but this was just a joke on the computer. If you have a dad, you really should be thanking him for bringing you into this world. Your mom probably wasn't even in the mood. And even as I joke about that, seriously, when we had our first child, when we had our first child, it was like, I think we talked about we were going to have, I don't know how many kids, but after that, Cindy was like, one is enough, one and done. That was extremely difficult. And also, we realized how selfish we were, very much so. And all of a sudden, our marriage drastically changed because it had to develop into a new phase. So when Mom found out she was pregnant, I think with Josiah, she was in tears. I mean, 18 months later, you're born. But when Josiah was born, and here you both are sitting here, and then I remember Mom being in, having an epidural, and they made me stand outside the room. That was one of the worst things. But when you guys were born, and now all these years later, to have you sitting in my living room and everything, I wish we could have more kids. And yet there came a time when Mom knew, we're done. We're done. This is enough. And she was always told, you'll know when you know. And we knew. But what a blessing today to have you guys here today, all these years later.
Mom even said she had a hard time with when she did have her tubes tied after me. She even said just the finality of it, even though she knew she didn't want to have a fourth. Just like this is the final decision, pretty much. Like, wait, can you undo that? I don't remember. But it's like,
You can, but it's harder than if a guy gets it done.
right, yeah. She had a hard time with even the finality of that decision.
Yeah, and then
The
God,
page you climb. It is in a way of finality
Mhm.
and chapter. And even as I see my kids grow, it's like I'm seeing, particularly watching Jack, because he's our youngest. Like, this is the final. He's not a baby anymore. I no longer ever get to have a baby again. No, in our type of in our marriage, we're not having any more kids, and it's like this is the last, young stages, learning stages, first experiences of, like, we had experienced snow down in Georgia. It's like I see that, watching them enjoy that, and it's like these are the last, because not having those kids and babes anymore. And yeah, it brings a new whole stage of that, as they're growing up. But there's the finality. No more babies. At that stage, or that young stage. So even I feel that quite a bit. Yes, you chose, this is, where you know when you're done, but constantly still it's there. Yeah, it's like, it's like it's sealing the deal on that part of your life.
Jack's a pretty cool last one to have, though. So
Yeah.
and then the people listening who might know us know that we have a fourth son, and then God steps in and all of a sudden shakes up our lives with an adopted son, and that's another whole story. But
that's episode. It's like a 3-episode
Okay.
in the future.
But I mean, I know we kind of
No, that's good.
I tracked into a little bit of the kids instead of marriage, even though that does flow together. But like Cody said, and why I started to bring up the kids in general, it's like you're never going to be ready. But you should be working toward it. But it's amazing when it actually gets there, it forces you to step even more than you knew you could, or whatever. So, it's easy, but you can be easy to be excused. No, I'm not ready.
Yeah. I mean, I admit it's excuse all the time, but
and
it's
along
bad.
the finality side, you could look at the same way in marriage. Okay, you're choosing to say we're done having kids. It's finality, and that's scary, and you're going to hold that. Same thing with marriage. Taking it the way we do when we're saying we're marrying, saying for life.
Oh, right, yeah.
This is your life. When you make that decision, you go to that altar. This is final.
Yeah.
And that's scary, and that's there's a lot of joy, and especially if you're doing it right, and this is where you're supposed to be. But that's scary. And in a way, it's like, again, man up.
Wake up looking to that person every day.
Some of my thoughts too. I mean, it's not saying it's bad, but like seeing my parents, they like unbelievers. They beat the narrative. Like they've been married. I don't even know, probably 30-something years. I think I don't even know. Couldn't tell you. But seeing their relationship, dad marries my mom. And my sister's 2 years old, so he gets thrown into having a kid right away. Kind of forces him into staying where he is for the last 40 years working because he has to make money. They weren't financially great off. Mom was part-time at McDonald's at the time, I think. And it baffles me and my sister every day, like, how they did it. Ultimately, it's true love, which, if you go back to when we were younger, we would not think it was there, but it was there. And like looking back on it now, it's like amazing because I have that excuse, like I'm not financially stable, probably not where I should be and whatever. But they had the same thing and they made it work as unbelievers, which is actually pretty eye-opening compared to what you put in perspective of yourself. So it's like they did it, you can probably do it, but seeing that and going through it as a kid sometimes, because arguments were crazy, mostly about money, but you don't want to go through it, so you try to not go down that road, but you take yourself out of it and look back into it. Yeah, it was rough and rocky, probably like all your guys' relationships. You guys aren't 100% prototypical, like lovey-dovey, perfect. No marriage is. So it's like, why make that excuse?
There's a missionary you guys would know, but most people wouldn't. And he was here visiting Cindy and I before, and you probably heard this, but I remember Philippians 2, 3, and 4 about do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others, and so on. And it came out. I think the Lord brought it out of me to say to him, would you want to be married to you?
Oh, I was just about to bring that up. It's like
Yeah.
Charlie always says that
Yeah.
one verse, and like you end up having a not so great spiritual moment sometimes, and you sit there and that comes across your brain. And it's like Charlie's in your head, and you're like, would you want to marry you after that? And it's like, no. So why pursue this? Because like you feel like crap after you do something wrong. Now
Jared's
like I don't
Jared's
want.
like, yes, I would love to.
I don't want to. I don't want anybody else to experience that. So like you sit there and like start nitpicking. I got to work on this. I got to work on that. But that's not how God wants it either. But it's good to be aware of it. But it's tough. That verse, that saying goes through my head all the time. You should never say it, Charlie. You screwed me up.
That's right.
I think it's good because it kind of puts it into perspective. It takes the thought of others being like what's the other word? Not standard. The expectation side, and putting it to yourself.
Yes.
It's-
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you being that to want somebody to be in the expectations that you have? Are you being that yourself?
You're preparing yourself.
Yeah.
Kenton and Laura, you think they have a perfect marriage, and they get in a little tuffle. You think the world's gonna end, and it's like, maybe marriage isn't always that great, but it's good to see.
Yeah, Cody's like, Mommy and Daddy are fighting.
I'm outside the car in the church parking lot, like,
Who's gonna pick me?
settle down. I'm like, can we settle this later? We got a service to go to. I look like a little
Cody's
long-
worried about who's gonna live with, Mom or Dad.
I'll just stay in the basement.
Of whose house?
So as far as the, we know that the instructions from the scriptures talking about, just very general here, wives are to see to it that they respect their husbands. It's a command. And you say, yeah, but they don't deserve it. And on the other hand, we don't have the option to call that shot. And then husbands are to love their wives. Well, what if they're unlovable? Oh, I don't think we don't have that. We're just commanded to love her anyway. And so I think it goes both ways. And so there's so much of the dynamic with each couple, but let me know if I'm speaking out of turn, but for me personally, from a male's perspective, it does seem that the physical intimacy part of a marriage is part of the process of intimacy, where without it, it's almost impossible for that male husband to, there's something missing in the ingredients of that having a close, good marriage. Not that that's the only thing, but if it's a missing ingredient, it's like making pancakes or bread with no salt or whatever. It just is not the same. It'll never be what it was intended to be. It won't taste right. It won't be right. And if we have to be commanded to love our wives in a relationship that we have the Holy Spirit within us, we understand that, but we're going through the battle of the flesh and the spirit, what is the driving element? Why is God saying to men, you need to love them? Because he knows we're going to get to a point in our marriage where we're going to not feel like loving our wife. And she is not going to want to respect her husband. And yet it's a command. We just have to do it. We have to realize that, accept it, and kick ourselves in the butt and say, it's just, I don't have an option. This isn't optional here. Pick and choose. This is just do it. Whether you like it or not. And you better do it the right way, his way, not a check it off the box way. And so inevitably, it seems like most marriages, the wives are probably going to struggle with that the most, respecting. So they have to be told. Husbands are going to struggle the most with loving their wife. So they got to be commanded to do it. But yet, looking at it from just the male's perspective, it does seem for most men, the physical side is one of the major ingredients in the making of that marriage. Without it, it just seems to be nearly impossible for there to be a oneness that wife may absolutely yearn for, desire, and be doing everything right in her life except for that one area. And she'll never produce what that recipe was meant to if she doesn't include that as well. But from a female's perspective, it seems to be a lot of the desire to be heard, to share security and being together and all of that, that to be valued more than just the physical side, and that it's genuine, too. And Laura, you're the only one here, so you have any thoughts on that at all from a female's perspective? I'm sorry you're the only one, but
Any thoughts on that specifically?
I'm sure it's woman to woman, there's
Yeah, I think it
little
varies.
variations, but
Like I also always kind of say like I'm not really your traditional woman either. I would say like Kent made the made the joke earlier that he does a lot of the cooking, majority of the cooking, cleaning, etc. And like that's what has worked for us, and that's the dynamic that functions. So, but I'm not your traditional homemaker, so I think that's like a little bit.
She's yet to make sourdough.
I think it's a little bit different. for
She
me.
needs the butter though.
Yeah, but like I just think I don't know, I think it is like it is per person, but like I mean I think one of the things too, like you said, is setting expectations, but then I think one of those things that's very hard is going into marriage as far as like sexual expectations. You don't always know what that's going to be for you. Like you don't know where between the two of you that is going to land, who is going to be the one who wants it more frequent or stuff like that. And so like I think in all regards, I think it's like person to person, but I think one of the things too is like ultimately part of what you're talking about though too is like it's a cyclical dynamic. I think the big thing too for probably some of the differences is like for women, I think it tends to be that is not just a act, it's something that is like a process, I would say, right? Like so like a lot of times getting to the point of intimacy doesn't start 5 minutes prior for a woman, right? Like it's like there's a lot of emotional aspects attached to wanting to get to that point and be at that point.
I mean that's the same for men. Not.
Yeah, right. So like, I mean, everyone's a little different, but like I think, in a lot of ways it's like that emotional safety, I feel like, which is like kind of like oftentimes what women are seeking, like that emotional component ties into that desire to be intimate. So like I think that's a big thing too, is in some ways when it's saying to love your wives, doing that is going to get them in a place where then they can reciprocate that, right? And so I think that's a big part of it too, is that emotional aspect often is a big part of everything, right? In that intimacy. And then I think that is key. But I mean, and I think also throughout marriage, when you've been married for a long time, I think it kind of ebbs and flows. There are times where it's been, like Kent would be the one who would be seeking it more, and there's been times where I would be the one who's been seeking it more. And like you said, there's seasons of life. There's times where you're busy. There's times where one of you is working weird schedules or doing whatnot. And I think it's like it's also an ever evolving process, right? Like I mean, we don't have kids yet, but you throw kids in there too, and it just adds a whole other layer, right? So I think, I think what you speak is true in most situations. It tends to be that the male is predominantly the one that is seeking it, and it's a little bit more important, and I think can be something he gets hung up on a little bit more so. But I think it can equally be the same way for women too. But I think again, that's also the emotional aspect and that process of making them feel safe and comfortable and protected and all those things leads to the point where they're more seeking for that more intimate dynamic too, I guess would be my feedback. I don't know if that was in line at all with what you said.
Yeah.
Jared just, scribbling notes.
I got
over
no
there.
comment on that.
He's scribbling notes.
All right, that's all for me for now, unless you got some other thoughts to go on. But yeah, so it's in no way kind of saying, do this, take this next step, do this right now, or anything like that. I think the Holy Spirit works through each of us. But like I told you before, for me, it was in my mind, in my relationship with the Lord, I knew I needed to have a job to be able to support a wife, and I needed to have a home, and I needed to finish my college. That was where I was at. And when those things were in place, I asked your mom to marry me, and went to her dad first. And I know that's sometimes considered a cultural thing, but if I were a dad and it was my daughter, that would mean a lot. And so I tried to, again, think of it as from my father-in-law's perspective. And I'll tell you his advice to me, because maybe he'll listen to this sometime. He said, yes, you have my permission. You can have her as your wife, but you can never send her back.
That's what Laura's mom tells me.
Yeah.
She said, you signed a no return policy.
That's right.
We won't take her back.
So Josiah's got 3 girls. I had no girls.
And I have girls. So you never had to actually see it or feel it from that side of it.
No, I can only imagine.
Boys. So it is a totally different perspective.
As our friend used to say, they're the prey and the predators are out there. And they're growing up fast.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's part of the culture that's kind of scary. And you can try to do your best to raise your kids. And I even find myself, I have to, you know, if you pray for them, but I'm also praying for their future potential husbands that are out there and how their parents are raising those young men and ladies for Jack, I guess. And when you look around and it looks pretty bleak, it's like, I guess I'm sure all generations in their own way have felt that way. You know, not alone in that. But when it's now your reality, it does step that.
So one of the hard things, I know I'm switching gears a little bit, but what if you have a child that doesn't embrace the things of the Lord? What if you have a husband that isn't walking with the Lord the way they should? Or what if you have a wife that isn't? And now you've made those vows and you're committed, and you realize I'm stuck. You know, I think a lot of people have a lot of self-evaluation. You know, how much am I responsible for in this? What can I do? Just pleading with the Lord to make His presence recognized, you know, as you go through it, and to guide you and to help you to be able to endure, because sometimes that is the way it is. Unfortunately, we want to think of getting married and having this commitment and all this is going to be, and they went off and lived happily ever after. And so there's a reality of the difficulties that the Lord warned us about, but what if it's long-term? Think of Hosea a little bit. Think of Job's situation there, initially. And then with the children, how responsible are parents over the choices that their children make? They all kind of are helpful to be prepared ahead of time before you get there, to kind of have some footing to prepare yourself for those things if they should come. That you've, in a sense, as far as is possible, you've made those decisions ahead of time of how you will respond and what your mode of life is going to be. What am I going to do if I am in one of these difficult situations? How am I going to handle it? Am I going to be faithful to the Lord? I think it's important that we at least come to grips with that ahead of time. When we adopted our son Paul, when they were doing their home study and we were going through all the interview process, which took a period of months. In that process, they're very pointed. They come right out and ask you, what if your child is this or that or whatever? How will you handle it? And you are supposed to answer honestly. And it's one thing to sit here and chat about it, these things. It's another thing to actually be in the midst of it.
In the trenches.
When you're in the fire. But I think there's benefit to at least somewhat doing your best to be prepared. And God knows what He's doing, and He gives us what we need when we need it. We're never left alone. And I think that just brings such a comfort to me, so very, very much. But the reality of it was we had to face the possibilities of what if your adopted child is whatever. And I think for me, and I think Cindy and I talked about this together as well, that we realized that if we had a child that was like this biologically, we didn't have any say in it either. And here we are, and this is the story of our life now. And so when we adopted our son, just like when we had each of our biological sons, impacted our lives and changed the trajectory of our lives. Each of them had an impact in our family and continue to. So it did our adopted son in the same way. And as you know, we still work through that like we do with all of us. We're all on a journey. But we know who's with us through it.
Okay. Wednesday, as long as your agent, mom, it's okay.
The warden of the prison.
Cool. Get on, watch this game.
Go Bills.
Were you gonna say when your dad was talking about salt being the ingredients? Were you gonna say something about that you could bring the salt?
No, it was more like not having sex or whatever you were saying. It's like making pancakes. And I was like, dude, don't got any batter.
You put it down.